Thank you so much for joining us today for the mission visit training. We're really going to be focusing on civil society advocacy here at the UN. And we understand that we have a mix of participants here today. Some of them are going to be preparing for their first mission visit, others, this is 30th, 80th, 100th, 1000th mission visit. So I'm going to try and make this as easy as possible, but also taking into account of the experience already here. But I do want to be cautious and with those that this is their first time. So bear with me if some of this is very repetitive or something you've heard in the back in your early days. So our goal is really to make this training practical, accessible, and useful for everyone. Most importantly, today is meant to be collaborative. So we are asking that if you have any questions or if you'd like to share your own experiences, and we're really just asking for everyone to engage throughout this session. And I apologize for those that I'm giving my back. And if I don't look at our audience here, I apologize, but I'm also trying to be present for our virtual audience. So it's going to be me and Charlotte. So I'm going to pass it over to Charlotte now for slide 2.
Thank you. So first of all, we do want to emphasize, and this is of course preaching to the choir, but setting the tone, the importance of having grassroots organizations, community leaders, faith-based organizations, youth individuals, and people directly impacted by the issues discussed in the room to strengthen the UN. So of course, civil society plays such an important role in connecting that international policy to lived realities. And so through this training, we want to build that confidence and, as Kimberly said, build those experiences already in the room to contribute to one another. And of course, staying grounded in individual voices and what's happening in the grassroots. And just having that reminder, because you don't need to sound like a diplomat to go on these conversations, but each one of us carries their own strength from that.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so what is a mission visit? Again, some of this may sound a little beginner style, but we do want to honor for those that are new to the UN spaces. So a mission visit is a meeting with diplomats from a country's permanent mission to the United Nations. Permanent missions are essentially diplomatic offices that represent governments at the United Nations. Diplomats working there negotiate resolutions, participate in UN discussions, shape policy language, and represent government priorities during international processes. Mission visits are really opportunities for civil society organizations to share their expertise, raise concerns, present recommendations, build relationships, and connect local realities to international policy making. These meetings may happen really throughout the year, but usually it's before major UN negotiations, during UN sessions such as CSW, HLPF, or even the General Assembly. They can happen during advocacy campaigns or as part of a long-term relationship building process. And most importantly, mission visits are not only for large organizations. Grassroots organizations, us, yourselves, youth advocates, local leaders, we all have an important role to play. Next slide. So sometimes people may ask, do these meetings actually matter, right? And I understand the frustration. However, the answer is yes, often more than when we realize. Diplomats spend much of their time reading reports, government statements, and negotiated language. However, civil society brings something else to the room. We bring human stories, community expertise, pragmatic experience, accountability perspectives, lived realities, and practical recommendations. We know what's going on the ground. We can easily tell them. Sometimes the lack of resources in these missions can sometimes surprise you for those that are new to this space. You would be surprised the lack of resources these missions have in recognizing what's happening on the ground of their own countries sometimes. So that's where we come into play. So this mission visits really help bridge that gap between what they're looking at policy, right? And lived experience. That's what we're there for. We're here to bridge that gap and showing them what's happening on the ground. So for example, a diplomat may understand issues like migration, trafficking, climate displacement, or gender inequality conceptually, but hearing directly from organizations working with affected communities creates a much deeper level of urgency and understanding. So advocacy is incremental to this process. One meeting may not immediately change policy, right? And I know that's what we wish, but it can open relationships, shape understanding, influence negotiations, and create future opportunities or move conversations forward over time. Next slide. So, the role of civil society. We already a little bit touched based on this, so we're going to edge it out a little bit more. So, civil society, as we said, plays a critical role within the United Nations system. Governments rely heavily on civil society organizations to better understand, again, what I said before, which is what is happening on the ground, which policies are actually working, where the gaps exist, and how international agreements are impacting communities. Civil society organizations often identify emerging issues early, provide direct services, support marginalized communities, collect community-based evidence, which is really huge resource for these missions, advocate for accountability, and connect, again, local realities to global policy discussions. That's really our bread and butter when it comes to these mission visits. And something important to remember, expertise comes in many forms. Some people may bring policy expertise. Others bring lived experience. Others bring technical or grassroots organizing experience. All those perspectives are valuable and necessary. Next slide.
So preparation is of course key. And once you've identified your focal point, you might be the person at the mission who works specifically in the issues that you're discussing, and establish your meeting date, time, and location. There are a few recommendations on what your team should do beforehand and delegating the work amongst each other to make sure that the mission visit goes as smoothly as it can. Of course, starting with researching the country and the mission itself, seeing what recent statements they might have put out, or policies that their government is under, understanding the government's priorities, which might change with election to election, but seeing to meet them where they are, and then going over these materials, familiarizing yourself with it, and coordinating amongst your team who will take what point. And then also in contact with this focal point, clarifying the mission of the meeting, and agreeing on what objectives you're working towards. Something else, of course, that's important to know is understanding that objective. Asking, are we raising awareness, sharing recommendations, building a relationship, seeking support for policy priorities, or inviting collaboration? Because as Kimberly said, these happen at different points throughout the year, but also could be about more of a long-term relationship. But having clarity around those goals will make it a more focused meeting and a more strategic outcome. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. And then, of course, that coordination makes a huge difference during mission visits when they play out. So we also recommend meeting before the actual visit, even for just 20, 30 minutes ahead of time, to be together and to walk into the room feeling prepared. And then from there, you'll review objectives, talking points, timing between each other, roles, and then any last minute updates. So in terms of the different roles, for example, one person may facilitate the introductions, kick it off. One person might lead the organizational overview, and provide any documents that you might have prepared ahead of time. Someone might present recommendations. Another person might have lived realities or community examples that will really bolster the conversation. And then, of course, there should always be a note taker to be able to document all the important conversation that you're having. And that'll really help with this coordination for increasing confidence going into the meeting. Next slide, please.
So just before we touch base on understanding your audience, I know that we quickly went over the team roles, but most of the time when you're holding these mission visits, and this is for the beginners, as Charlotte shared, preparation is key. Knowing exactly why you're meeting and what you hope to accomplish is everything when it comes to these meetings. And it does not need to be so more, I want to say it doesn't need to be like a school presentation. It is considered to be a conversation, right? What you plan, definitely plan. Know who's going to be sharing what. But at the end of the day, remember that these are also human beings, so you want to remain flexible. When we say assignment of role, and yes, you can present. Sometimes mission visits are like that, are in a more presentation mode. However, really what we're saying is if the mission has a question on the organization, the person that was assigned to learn or to present about the organization should be able to answer those questions. The person who was assigned to discuss the recommendations of this organization should be the person to answer the question of the mission. Like, oh, what are the recommendations that you have in regards to girls leadership? Oh, well, thank you that you've asked. Charlotte, could you please share so that's kind of how it is. Although we are asking for you to have roles, we really do encourage that from taking it from a presentation level to a conversational level where you're actually going back and forth with the mission. It is key to really advancing any of our recommendations is if we actually have a relationship with them. And this is a mission visit is not just a one-time meeting most of the time. We encourage for that to be the start and then asking them even towards the end, what could we do for you? How can we make this better? Katie and I have had a few instances where we've asked that question and you'd be surprised with them, what they'll respond. Sometimes they'll ask, oh, well, actually, could you make a fact sheet for us to have next to each other so we can have better responses when it comes to negotiations on the floor? And then we were like, oh, that's something we can easily do. And we didn't know that you wanted that. But now that we do, so it's an ever learning process, and not every mission visit is going to be the same. It's never going to be the same. But so for those that this is just their first time, do not be discouraged if there is not a real process. Understand that you are in a team and understand that that team will always have your back. And the more you do it, practice, 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 practice. Practice makes perfect. So I'll begin again with the slides. So when does advocacy become strategic, right? So different governments respond differently depending on, again, political priorities, domestic realities, regional alliances, and again, current UN negotiations, and the issue itself. So for example, some missions may respond strongly to human rights framing, Others may prioritize development, migration governance, economics, education, climate, or security. Part of effective advocacy is understanding what what framing is going to actually resonate with the audience, with the mission. Who are we meeting in that mission? Are we meeting with the person that's in charge of gender rights and versus the ambassador? So is this the person that's actually going to do the negotiation? So now I need to maybe shift what I'm talking about to be more palatable to the person I'm actually speaking with. So knowing that is key, because sometimes the ambassador will have a more overview versus their secretary of gender or something, their expertise, or there's usually so many titles and every mission is different. So know who you're talking to and know how you're going to shape what you're talking about. Um, and that doesn't mean compromising or your values or what you're trying to say. It just means you're communicating strategically so you're and easily understood. We want them to understand what we're talking about. Because, like I said, sometimes their lack of resources can also mean a lack of understanding. So, we are trying to make this as easy for them to take in so they can do the advocacy and the negotiating we want them to do. So, make this easy for them. Next slide. So, most mission visits, believe it or not, can sometimes be relatively short. So, structure really does matter sometimes. And that doesn't mean like, okay, Charlotte, you have 5 minutes. Okay, Katie, you have 3 minutes. That means, okay, I understand that there's going to be greetings and introductions. So, how do I make that more efficient? I have my business card. She may not know my name right off the top of the person that we're meeting with, they may not know my name, but now they have my business card so they can connect the name to the person. So to make introductions easier, I highly recommend to leave a business card or something that has your information on it, a flyer, like these are the people that you met with, whatever the case may be. However you can do it, leave it there. So that way you don't have to say, my name is, and then so and so. Like, just make it as easy for them as possible. Here you go. We all represent, run, you know. And then if you want to know the organization, sometimes you have time, but sometimes you really don't. So leave your business card there, call it a day. Okay. And then understand kind of, if you want, sometimes it's easy to have an organizational overview, right? Of kind of how, all right, so I have 30 minutes with this person. Um, what do I really want to get out of this, right? I know I have to talk about the org at some point, and I know I have to talk about the commission that's happening. But really, I want them to focus on my recommendations. So I'm really going to focus my time on the recommendations. If I see talking about the commission is going a little longer than I would want to, just keep that in mind. Just know that your time is precious there because you don't have much of it. And also, when it comes to presenting your information, you don't want to lose focus. And sometimes that can happen when you're in that mission. So remember to always bring it back. Like I think when we did one of the mission visits, Katie was quick to, that's so great. Now let's bring it back to what we were talking about initially. Always have somebody to kind of bring it back to what the meeting is about at hand, right? So um, you really want to focus on, again, the purpose of the meeting, key concerns and issues, recommendations and ask, questions and dialogue at the end. You do want to have some time for that because that is really where you see whether or not you can continue this relationship. If they say, oh, you know what, contact me after this commission, after the negotiations, or please prepare that fact sheet for me that I need for my negotiations, and, or we don't have priorities right now, but let's get back to you mid-June once the ambassador is more settled in. That's the part where you're actually understanding whether or not this was the beginning of a relationship between you and the mission. So questions and dialogue are really important at the end. And of course, you ended off with closing and appreciation. Again, can't stress enough, mission visits should feel conversational. You are not only there to share your perspectives, but also to listen and better understand what the mission's priorities and positions are. Only through that conversation can you really bridge that gap. Their policy, our lived realities. How do you meet them in the middle, right? How can you bridge what they're talking about? Yes, you're talking about migration policies, but this is what your policies are actually doing on the ground. Help them understand that. Help them understand what is needed because that's who we're representing, right? We're representing the people on the ground. The strongest mission visit, in my opinion, is always a genuine dialogue rather than presentations, as I said, directed at diplomats. You really, really, I can't stress enough. And the only way you'll get that dialogue is if you are prepared, is if you do know all of that information, and if you do your research on that country. Next slide, please.
So this next section is more of a to-do list that'll come as second nature to all of you, but kind of to have these reminders going into it. First of all, of course, arrive 10 to 15 minutes early. I know one time we were coming from a mission visit. Luckily, it was after the visit, but we were waiting maybe 10 minutes for the elevator. It was on the 40th floor, so it was just one of those things that you don't want to have to experience. Of course, bringing printed handouts, which are especially helpful because, as Kimberly said, if these are short and you're only giving your elevator pitch, it'll be helpful for them to have those printed materials later to kind of remind and be able to refer to. Business cards, a notebook, and pen. So kind of like the phone key wallets thing, but except for mission visits. And then, of course, the level of professionalism is extremely important in how you carry yourself and bring yourself into these spaces based on those first impressions. Going from the respect with security staff to following the visitor procedures carefully, but then also silencing your cell phones and how you're greeting the representatives. On the virtual side, you'll have to, of course, test the internet, camera, and microphone, and just hope nothing happens. But then also try to avoid interruptions, anything distracting in the background, any loud noises that might come up. And that also is important because you're not in that online space to really pay close attention to the pacing. So emphasizing why it's important to meet beforehand with your team to avoid those awkward talking over each other moments. But during the meeting, definitely keep your camera on if appropriate and mute yourself when you're not speaking and try to remain visually engaged. Because you can still have that warm and humane approach while still remaining professional because you're representing not just yourself, but your organization, the broader coalition or network, and civil society communities as a whole, especially in that face of shrinking civil society space, maintaining that presence is really important.
So, as we've been, saying over and over and over again, one of the most important advocacy skills is communication. And when I mean communication, I mean strong communication, but in a way that the only way the strong communication happens is if you're clear, concise, respectful, strategic, but again, human-centered. You want your points to not be confusing. You want your points to leave no room for, well, maybe there's some, but the least amount of interpretation as possible. I want you to do X, Y, and Z because of A, B, C. You want them to understand exactly what you're advocating for. You don't want them to interpret based on, maybe trying to sound a little bit more diplomatic or professional or like, oh, I know these. Be clear. Be clear as to what you are asking for. Um, and yes, data and statistics are really important because stories help people. Uh, sorry, data and statistics, when you are sharing them, they are important and they should be shared during these mission visits. But really, what I find um, more, I guess, more impactful is when you combine the data and statistics to the stories, right? To the stories because the stories are what really help people, what helps connect these missions emotionally to these issues. Sometimes they forget that they're not just, you know, numbers on a piece of paper. These are human beings that, our organizations work with every day. So we need to remind them of that. And where appropriate, again, examples from your work or community can make issues feel, again, much more real and urgent. At the same time, we want to, of course, when we're sharing those issues, always remember safeguarding, right? We want to ensure that we're protecting confidentiality from those that are on the ground. We want to avoid perhaps traumatization and always center dignity when sharing lived experiences. It's also completely okay not to know the answer to every question, and will always, always, always be a good way to set up a next mission visit. I don't know the answer to that question. However, I can get it to you for the next time we meet or, via emails. Um, if a diplomat asks something you can't answer immediately, it's totally okay with. That's such an important question, and we'd be happy to follow up afterwards. That's how these mission visits are done. You don't need to know every answer to every question. Nobody expects you to. Um, and again, it's a great way to start off the next time we have another mission visit or the next email. Next slide. And okay, so recommendations, advocacy, yes. Is that? Oh, sorry. Nope. So strong advocacy doesn't only identify problems, it also represents recommendations and solutions. Diplomats need clarity around what actions you are seeking, what support you are requesting, and what changes you want to see. Again, your recommendations should be clear, strong language, clear, but also maybe also adding their the buzzwords, right? What's happening at the UN? Like back in the day was, social protection floors, advancing social protection floors. So use that. Like in order to achieve, social protection floors, you have to do again X, Y, and Z. Make it as simple for them and as palatable for them as possible. Um, Clear ask makes advocacy a lot more actionable and effective. So, yep. Next slide. Yes.
So after the mission visit, Kimberly had raised that question, okay, do they even matter? But in the follow-up, I think really is the key in making sure that they do. So of course, sending that thank you email, sharing any resources that you had promised to send, but then going over with your team and figuring out where do we go from there, both within the organization, but then also in a continued collaboration with the mission and discussing next steps. And the note taker will have documented who attended, the main discussion points, any questions that were raised on either end, especially if the mission wanted to find out more about something, their reactions, as well as any follow-up opportunities, like the next commission or the next forum that engagement could be possible. Because those strong advocacy relationships and getting to the purpose of the visit is built through consistency and continued engagement and not letting that progress fall through the cracks.
And we just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear from Charlotte and I. We really hope this training helped somewhat for those that have had experience and those that are beginning to do mission visits. And we really want the UN advocacy to feel more practical, accessible, and approachable. Everyone.